Great. So I hope everyone can hear me okay. As you may know, this is Rebecca Winchard-Knox. I am our Net Zero organizer with the Mass Climate Action Network, and we're excited to be hosting this webinar. It's the third webinar in our Affordable Housing as a Climate Solution series we've been co-hosting with LISC and the Smart Growth Alliance. And this webinar, as you can see, is really focused on how we can create and support more net zero and highly efficient housing that's also affordable and sustainable within our communities. So I'm going to give a few context setting slides, and then we're going to turn it over to our speakers. And just a few housekeeping notes before we really get started. So as you guys can see, I have everyone muted who is not a presenter, and I ask that you keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation so that we don't have any background noise distracting folks. And if you have questions throughout people's presentations, feel free to use the chat bar as a way to drop your questions in, since we'll have a designated slot, probably about 15-20 minutes for Q&A at the end. But please refrain from answering other people's questions, just because that can sometimes be distracting from the presentation. Okay, great. So just a quick background here that we do before all of our webinars. So we just want to give you guys an overview of what MCAN is. So the Mass Climate Action Network was founded in 2000, and we really see ourselves as a learning network of chapters across the Commonwealth. Over 50 chapters representing over 100 cities and towns that we use as a learning network to really share tools locally, to implement clean energy solutions into our communities, and then to turn that change into statewide change. And I think tonight's going to be a really great opportunity to hear about how we can implement local solutions and also how we can turn that into statewide action. So as everyone on this call knows, climate change is happening. It's happening now, and we're seeing really severe impacts in Massachusetts that we need to act on now to address. And although I don't have a slide for it, we also know that we're currently in a housing crisis, and we see these two things as being really connected. We can't properly address one without addressing the other. And being a grassroots organization, we are firm believers that it's really all about the local action. Here you can see pictures from our chapters doing different local events, from town meeting. We are firm believers that change starts from the grassroots up, and that we don't need to wait for our state decision makers in order to create the change that we want to see in our communities. And we also have the good news, which is that we do have the tools to create these solutions. Being a very solutions-oriented organization, we're excited to be putting on these webinars as a way to educate, but also to offer real tools and support for how we can create, again, more affordable and more livable housing in our towns and cities. So just a quick agenda for the evening. We're going to start by hearing from Emily Jones, who is the Program Officer for the Local Initiative Support Corporation, for Boston's Green Retrofit Initiative. And she'll be doing some context setting for us and also getting into some of these solutions. And then we're going to hear from Jesse Thompson, who is a partner at Kaplan Thompson Architects, has done a lot of net zero, highly efficient, affordable housing, and we'll be talking about more of the design and industry perspective on this really crucial issue. And then lastly, we'll be hearing from one of our chapter leaders in Greene Newton, who has been partnering and creating Livable Newton over a long period of time to lead this campaign to create more affordable housing on the community level. And then we're going to wrap up with a moderated Q&A. So once again, if you have questions throughout the chat, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And again, I'm seeing some chats that people are having trouble with audio. We recommend calling in. I dropped the call-in number in the chat box, so please feel free to call in if you're having difficulty with your computer audio. Okay, so with that, I think I'll turn it over to Emily Jones.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So again, my name is Emily Jones. I'm with Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. We're one of the country's largest community development organizations, and we invest in affordable housing and economic development locally. We work with local partners to drive investments and transformative change. I lead our office's Green Retrofit Initiative, and that supports affordable housing partners in completing desired energy efficiency and clean energy projects, providing relevant trainings for the field, and driving progressive policy that results in clean, efficient, and equitable energy for the Massachusetts affordable housing sector. Next slide. So the first question is, what is affordable housing? So there's lots of types and definitions of affordable housing, and the Green Retrofit Initiative has primarily focused on multifamily or 5+ unit affordable housing that's produced and preserved with the support of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC, and other local subsidies. So generally speaking, we define affordable housing as serving households at or below 80% of area median income, and without having to spend more than 30% of your income on housing costs. So the need for affordable housing at all levels, but particularly this affordable housing level is desperate. Currently in the greater Boston region, 24% of renter households are paying over half of their income to cover housing costs. One note is naturally occurring affordable housing is oftentimes something where a rent just happens to be below market price. However, if and as housing costs are continuing to increase more rapidly than income in the region, this type of affordable housing is going to become more scarce. So that's why LISC and our partners are so committed to increasing the production and preservation of subsidized affordable housing units, which requires a long-term affordability restriction, and it really ensures that residents pay no more than 30% of your income on your housing costs. Next slide, please. So the question, can affordable housing be a climate solution, is the answer is it depends, right? So as many of you know, the residential sector is a key contributor to our overall carbon emissions because of the energy usage that's needed for space heating and cooling, water heating, and appliances. One thing to note about the multifamily residential sector is it has a leg up on smaller single-family detached residences because you have a lot less outer walls to heat or cool. It can also have centralized or semi-centralized building systems, which can provide some economies of scale. Important to note is that location of affordable housing or any housing is key because, of course, if you live near public transit in a walkable location, you might be able to have lower carbon emission travel options. The bottom line here is that over the past 2 decades in Massachusetts, there's been significant progress that affordable housing partners have made and housing agencies have made in investing in production and preservation of efficient multifamily affordable housing, which I'll cover shortly. The one last thing to remember is we are becoming, as a sector and broadly building sectors, we increasingly know that carbon emissions is not necessarily equivalent to just the operational efficiency of a building. So we have to be really, we have to be mindful of that as we're seeking to support truly regenerative climate solutions for building and maintaining high performance affordable housing that's actually low, really lifetime low carbon usage. Next slide, please. So CDCs are community development corporations. They're mission-based organizations that have social and environmental justice traditions. They've been the key drivers of affordable housing production and preservation throughout Massachusetts communities since the 70s. And there are other for-profit and public housing that's been key to creating and preserving affordable housing as well. So starting about 2 decades ago, the greening affordable housing movement really gained momentum among that CDC community. Also, another enterprise, another community development organization started the Green Communities program in 2004, and that's driven comprehensive green building practices and policy changes specifically for the affordable housing sector. Oftentimes, enterprise Green Communities criteria is called LEED for affordable housing. The costs and benefits of green affordable housing was research that was done about 15 years ago that recommended cost-effective pathways for affordable housing owners to achieve and maintain energy and water efficiency in their properties. So also during this period, there was generous grants where there was support for integrated design processes, green certification, and grants for certain renewable technologies. So all of those investments really allowed the affordable housing field in Massachusetts to experiment, learn, and hone promising practices related to sustainability. Next slide. So over the last decade, the sector started to recognize the environmental impact that all of the existing buildings could have, which really led to an increased emphasis on rehabs or retrofits. But with all these diverse building types, ages, it was hard to know where folks could begin, which buildings they should prioritize in terms of their rehabs. So we started to see the proliferation of online benchmarking or energy and water usage monitoring platforms. This was EPA Portfolio Manager, WeGoWise, or a couple, and the sector started to use those so they could measure and compare their building performance and prioritize the rehabs. LISC's Green Retrofit Initiative was also created during this time. It was to support affordable housing owners in taking full advantage of our state's new utility funding program for low-income multifamily housing. It was called it's still the LEAN program, and thanks to LEAN, over the past 10 plus years, many owners have been able to make substantial improvements to their properties in between capital cycles. So we've also worked to connect those utility partners with owners and affordable housing finance agencies so that the LEAN program can serve properties approaching refinance in a streamlined manner. Next slide, please. So increasingly, the narrative in the sector is starting to shift from that solely cost-benefit equation toward a climate focus. We know there's much more aggressive green building requirements that are driving us toward our lofty, much-needed climate goals. The Massachusetts Stretch Code and Green Communities Acts have come into being, and certain municipalities like Boston and Cambridge have developed local zoning requirements and building energy use reduction targets. As many of you know, there's also local movements toward fossil fuel bans. So we and many of our partners urge communities to consider how they can support that policy change and additional investment that can help bridge that incremental cost gap so that all building types, all different properties can achieve wide-scale adoption of passive house building, that performance standard. Given affordable housing needs these additional funding sources to achieve all these important goals, our partners, including MCAN, Mass Smart Growth Alliance, have really focused on driving adequate resources for passive house for the affordable housing community. At the state level, we've successfully advocated for passive house incentives and trainings to help bridge that incremental cost gap to get from current code to passive house new construction. The housing agency, our state housing agency, DHCD, that runs our low-income housing tax credit program, they've also provided competitive advantage now for projects that commit to building to the passive house standard, which is a huge win. One of our housing finance agencies that provides permanent mortgages for affordable housing is also providing preferential financing for borrowers who commit to building or retrofitting to some of these higher performance levels, including passive house. So we see these as all really positive things to get us to the next step of climate change mitigation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. So what is coming? So, what is coming? Great. So there's quickly on this a few things. There's many things coming down the pike. There's obviously more aggressive implementation of action plans to help us achieve our Commonwealth carbon neutrality goals. We're transitioning, we know, from fossil fuels to an all-electric grid and all-electric buildings to go toward 100% renewables. For that, we highly recommend that to best foster these multiple benefits, again, from improved climate outcomes and health outcomes to resiliency outcomes, and lower long-term operating costs, that folks support that investment that's needed to achieve passive house and similar high-performance building standards. Next slide, please. So as a sector, the affordable housing sector, I think we've learned several important themes. The first is that investing upfront in this planning, this integrative design process, and high-performance building materials and systems, that it can pay back over time. In fact, you can make the case that any investment for us that pays back in less than 15 years, which is our usual financing cycle for LIHTC projects, can be worth it. Costs are continuing to come down as demand is driving product availability, and developers' teams are becoming more experienced and comfortable with high-performance building systems. And we've learned that refinancing one's project, it really provides that magical moment to achieve deeper energy and water savings, because that's the time when affordable housing has money for rehab investments that can be leveraged. However, it always needs to be done in a proactive, planful manner to be successful. We also know that as more complex high-performance building equipment and systems are coming online, we need to install them, program them, operate them, and maintain them correctly to ensure long-term performance. So we need more granular tools to help us understand when a building is performing or not performing. We need to make sure our maintenance professionals are trained so they feel comfortable with all these systems. And we need manufacturers to make better designed equipment that respond to today's building needs. Organizational leadership is key. That's when an organization, such as the CDC, makes a high-level commitment to sustainability, that can guide and empower the staff at every level to take action that really drives systemic change. Most importantly is the idea that all of these themes are connected. So investing in high-performance, low-carbon, affordable housing, that has synergistic benefits for everyone, from residents who are going to enjoy a healthier home, affordable energy bill, to the Commonwealth achieving its carbon neutrality goals. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. If folks have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat bar at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them during Q&A at the end of the session. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Jesse.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, next slide. So I'm an architect from Portland, Maine, and we're working all over New England. Actually, next. And you know, why are we all talking about anything on the call here? This is our beloved oyster bar in town, which now on the king tide floods, which this didn't happen 20 years ago in our town. Next slide. Here's our Whole Foods. This is a storm tide and heavy rainfall. This is what happens. So there's these things that everyone knows is lurking out there. Next. And we all know that we basically need to stop burning things, burning everything. We just need to start making everything out of clean power. But this is this big, crazy goal that folks on this call are all working hard to pull off. And so Rachel asked me to do this, to be here today to show some versions of what's possible and what's out there. So next, please. And I think there's a tension in the environmental movement where this is the sort of the solution seen out there, is we need to downsize, we need to all move out to the country, we need to live the simple life. This is the Thoreau fantasy. Next slide. The reality is we actually need to fix this. We need to fix our cities. We have to fix our downtowns, and we have to stay out of the wilderness. That's the environmental solution most of us have sort of gotten our heads around. So next. And I think if you look at any downtown, this is Portland, Maine, our downtowns are full of these parking lots where we actually ripped down buildings 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And it turns out there were people living there. Almost everywhere you see a parking lot, there was probably someone living there in 1920. So we kind of know that we have a lot of room to build in our towns if we can sort of work up the courage to figure out how to do it well. So next, please. We started trying to hack away at how to do clean energy buildings. In 2008, we got a client who asked us to do a climate change solution building, and we figured out how to do a net zero little barn. It's called the Bright Built Barn, and it's 800 square feet. It was really a pilot project, but it's net zero. It's been humming along for almost 12 years now. Next. And so our office kind of moved. We figured out some bigger buildings. We figured out how to do these are renovations on the left. That's a renovation of a house that went full net zero, where we actually fixed an old house. On the right is a net zero addition. Next slide. We even founded a company called Bright Built Home, which next is you call us up and we deliver you a net zero home. Comes on a truck, we assemble it next. And this is on the single family world. This is kind of a done solution. There's really almost no reason not to build a net zero home. The technical problem is solved. We're doing 30 houses a year with Bright Built Home all over Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York. So next. These are homes. Next, please. They're just nice houses. They look normal. They got solar panels on the roof. They don't use any fossil fuels. It's next, please. It's kind of a solved technical problem. You can make a warm, happy house with comfortable folks, but getting this into a downtown situation is a little trickier. So next. In our company motto, we wrote this down long ago, is beautiful, sustainable, attainable. So it was sort of this challenge. We had to figure out how to make everything attainable. So next, please. And this is our first passive house apartment building. And it's a low-income, affordable housing building. It was built on the LIHTC program that Emily was just talking about. The first 10 people who moved in were formerly homeless. Kind of a amazing thing, but this is a passive house. So this is a building that uses so little energy, it's basically passive. Next, please. 2 years later, we were doing, this is a senior housing project in Maine near us, and it's 20 units, lovely folks living there. Again, this meets all the climate action goals. Next. Or this building, which is in downtown, and this is a workforce housing building, so you can buy an apartment in our downtown for $200,000 at this building. We're really working on affordability, and you can rent this $1,500 a month. Gets you a home in downtown. Kind of an amazing thing when housing prices have just escalated out of control in so many places. This is the puzzle we've been working at. So next. And this is the tricks we've been doing, and I think this is the thing that it'd be great for everyone to sort of fight for. So this program called Passive House, this thing of making a building, almost passive. So next slide. This is a graph of different buildings, and it's showing you, zero is our goal. Our goal is zero energy. And then, so next, you can see that buildings come in all different kinds. This is your average apartment building. It's like a 69, by the way this chart works. And, our goal is zero, but we're at 69. So next. Here's an example. A passive house is a 15. It's not doing it by making energy with solar panels. It's using it just by conserving energy. And it's showing you the difference you can get from 69 all the way down to 15 on this scale by getting to this energy saving program. Next. And then, so here's the graph. We've got these crazy huge energy hogs like fast food restaurants, which are like 400s. And then we have apartments. The average apartment building is 69, and it shows that if we can adopt really, really stringent programs, we can get really close to our climate goals. Next. And this is this crazy thing that's underlying it, is we can build really good buildings. So 2010, these are things we kind of know, but it's worth everybody just looking at this because of how kind of wild it is. A single solar panel installed on a roof was like $2,680. A single solar panel in 2010. 2010 is not very long ago. So next. 2014, this thing is now $1,000. Next. This is where we are today. That same thing that in 2010 was $2,700 is now $670. And this is the crash of solar. This is why we're seeing it pop up everywhere. It's not, just good intentions. It's that the economics have completely shifted. So next, please. And a solar panel makes about 400 kilowatt hours if you pointed this out. And this is the kind of information that's really good for everybody to sort of know. If you go next. What's 400 kilowatt hours? That's like run all the lights in a nice house for a month. So you've got, you're cooking, you're running the clothes dryer, you're washing your clothes, you've got your lights on. That's what one solar panel does for a normal house. So, 12 of those covers a house for a year for all of that stuff. Next. And it can drive an electric car 1,500 miles. That's like one solar panel. This is this kind of magic thing we're staring at. The same time we've got these crazy climate goals, we've got this other thing happening. So next. And then here's another weird thing. Batteries, like A battery that held 1 kilowatt-hour of energy was $1,100 in 2010. It's now $167. Like, that's a crazy price drop. This is why we have electric cars. This is what's happening underfoot. Right as everyone's sort of a little half terrified, there's these amazing other things happening. So next. And actually next. And so here we have a thing that costs you $678, and in Massachusetts, it pays you $188 a year. This is like, everyone should go out and put solar panels in Massachusetts on their house as fast as they can, and we should be putting on all our apartment buildings to start making up the energy that we do about these passive houses that use very little. So next. And so passive house. Next, please. Here is this first passive house we did. This is a very well insulated building. They're nice apartments, really simple. Next, please. A passive house is a building that is so efficient. See that little heater in the background? That is a little $50 heater that heats an entire apartment. This is how efficient this entire building is. That's the heating system for a whole apartment. Next. And that for the building owner, this building, $55 a month for everything, hot water, heat, and electricity. You know, $660 to run an apartment for an entire year is what people are seeing for the numbers. This is permanent affordability. This is, you know, all of us would be pretty thrilled to have this happen in any of our houses. So next. And here's an example. You know, here's that building I showed earlier, $165 a square feet, meets these standards. Next, please. And you know, it's a normal building. This is normal construction. There's nothing crazy rocket science. It's just really high quality. You're very careful. You have good ventilation systems. You have fresh air in every room. And you really think through your insulation strategy. Next. But this is what people get to live in. You know, this is what affordable housing can be. Next. Warm, cozy, comfortable, safe. I think this is what we want for all of us. Next. You know, and a beautiful building for this community that they're all proud of, and is not causing, you know, the damage to the environment is a completely different category than we were thinking. Next. And so here's these goals. And next slide. You can actually see a comparison. Here's the energy use of these buildings. The orange is the white building we showed, and green. These are sitting there, you know, right around these climate goals, or these buildings we did in 2015, 2017. We've realized this is totally possible, and that every apartment building in the state can really be doing this. Next. Here's a project we're doing in Connecticut. Next. One in New Hampshire. This is going to be under construction in the spring. Next. And here's a building in a downtown. You know, this is just rebuilding the downtown next to a bus line, next to transit, a 5-story building that meets all these standards as we're all scale jumping. All of us architects pushing each other and teaching each other these sort of climate solutions that are sitting right there for all of us. So next. And I think this is what we've seen is that we've tried a lot of programs. We've tried a lot of methods to get our climate damage down. And the most effective tool we've seen, and I think it's why it's so gratifying to see people like Emily pushing so hard for policy to change, is that if we can link this, if we can link affordable housing to programs like Passive House, we really can solve this climate problem. And if we can then, as I think we're about to hear in a second, change our laws so that we can start building buildings again in our downtowns and build buildings where we used to be able to build them in 1890, we've got a great solution sitting here for all of us. So I think that is my slideshow.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse. You covered a lot of really great stuff really quickly. So folks, again, feel free to drop chat questions for Jesse into the chat box at the bottom so that he can address them at the end of our presentation. And now we're going to hear from Dan Rubin from Greene Newton.
Thanks. I am going to talk about how Greene Newton has advanced green affordable housing. Next slide. Greene Newton has influenced 2 major developers to incorporate passive house, heat pumps, and low embodied carbon building materials. We've persuaded the city of Newton to require passive house or LEED, as well as EV charging stations for special permits. Special permits in Newton right now are for developments of 20,000 square feet and more. I'm going to talk about our strategy and our collaboration with housing advocates. Next slide. Greene Newton is 30 years old. We have about 400 members. We started out mostly as an educational organization, but we're more involved in issue advocacy now. Next slide. So the city of Newton has 90,000 residents. Housing prices are skyrocketing, and I have to switch back to my slides because I can't see the bottom on my screen. Wealthy people are displacing middle class and working class people because housing prices are so high. Newton is an environmental leader in some areas. We have the highest amount of renewable electricity in the state, but not in others. We're a community of mostly single-family homes, and we are so we lag in terms of transit-oriented development. Next slide. The most contentious issue we have in Newton is development. We have a lot of, it's on the front page of the Newton tab and other newspapers every week. There are pressures to build because we have a housing shortage. Seniors that want to downsize have a hard time finding homes in Newton. Young people that grew up in Newton have a hard time affording it, as do Newton employees like teachers and policemen. Also, more building would increase our tax base. On the other side, there are a lot of people that oppose new development in Newton, and Rightsize Newton has organized them. They don't want to see change. They want to see Newton stay as a community of single-family homes. They're afraid of traffic and noise, that their housing values will go down, and that they would be attracting, and that new development would attract the wrong kind of people. Depending upon the conversation, they would either be too rich, too poor, or, God forbid, they would be renters. Next slide. I started the Greene Newton Building Standards Committee with Jim Purdy in September 2018. We have 11 members who are building professionals or city planners. There are 3 things on our agenda. The first was we wanted to determine what exactly are we fighting for, what are our principles, and with those principles then to influence developers to use them and city government to require them. Next slide. So these are our principles. Passive house, electric heating, hot water, and cooking as opposed to using natural gas or oil, low embodied carbon building materials, and minimizing single occupancy vehicles for travel to these developments. Notice that we have only 4 principles. We didn't want to have 16 principles because we couldn't remember them, let alone everybody else. Also, these are principles that are most specifically related to climate change. Next slide. So we went, after developing our principles, we cultivated alliances, most importantly with the Newton housing advocates, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. We also cultivated these other alliances, and for city councilors and Newton city planning staff, we developed some passive house and green building training sessions. Next slide. So we formed this alliance with Livable Newton. Livable Newton was founded by Engine 6, some housing advocates. They're a coalition that advocates development in Newton that makes Newton more inclusive, integrated, healthy, and sustainable. And I listed the members of Livable Newton. Next slide. Becoming allies with Livable Newton is a natural for Greene Newton. We both support dense transit-oriented development. Greene Newton supports it because it's best for climate change. Livable Newton supports it because it supplies badly needed housing. Both of our organizations look at problems from a societal viewpoint rather than from a narrow self-interest. Greene Newton has benefited because Livable Newton is more politically savvy than us, and we find ourselves fighting for the same building projects, and I will note 2 of them. Next slide. The Northland Newton development. This is a development, and I've got to switch to my slides because I can't read this. Northland Newton Development is a development proposal for 14 buildings, including 800 apartments, 140 affordable units. And that would make it the biggest affordable unit conglomeration in the city of Newton. It's also office building and commercial buildings. A year ago, we met with the Northland developer, and we said, we will support you if you commit to our 4 green building principles. Northland went out, hired a wonderful green building consulting firm. We found them some passive house classes to take, and we found them the Mass Save subsidies so that they would take those classes, and they did. 8 months, next slide, please. 8 months later, Northland committed to passive house for 3 of its 8 residential buildings. If it was built today, it would be the biggest passive house development in Massachusetts. Also importantly, they committed to using passive house principles for all of their buildings. So for example, their office buildings, their commercial space probably have too much glass to quite achieve the passive house certification, but they would still use fantastic air sealing, great insulation, energy recovery, ventilation, fantastic windows, and more. All these buildings will be heated by heat pumps. They will do a low-embodied carbon analysis and use low-embodied carbon materials where possible, and they have a fantastic transportation plan which was negotiated with the city. As a result, since Northland committed to this, Greene Newton supports them along with Livable Newton. We've testified at many city council hearings that have been very contentious. We've written articles, we've met with city councilors, and a lot more. Last month, city council approved this project by 1 vote. Rightsize Newton immediately went out and got 5,000 signatures to force this onto the ballot. It will be on the ballot on March 3rd, and now Greene Newton and Livable Newton are working for a yes vote. Next slide. So the second project, which is very much a parallel to Northland, is Mark Development's Riverside project. It's at the end of the green D line. The proposal is for more than 600 apartments, 100 of them affordable, and more. Just like with Northland, we met with the developer. We said, we'll support you if you commit to our principles. They hired a great firm to study the principles, and they attended the passive house classes that we found for them. Next slide. Mark Development committed to pretty much the same thing that Northland committed to, our 4 principles. As a result, we have supported them in the same way. The City Council decision is due in May, June, and Rightsize Newton is fighting this every step of the way. Next slide. So what have we learned? First, environmentalists have a lot more power today than we did a few years ago. People are concerned about climate change. They seek out our opinions and they listen when we talk, more so than I would have imagined. Our alliance with Livable Newton has been very important. Together, between them and us, we bring almost as many speakers to the contentious city council hearings as does our opponents. We have found these 2 big developers, as well as the city of Newton, to be very open to strong green building principles, and we found that they needed good education, which we've gotten for them. Next slide. Very importantly, when we said we will support you if you build according to our principles, that resonated with them, and they've told us that many times, that our input with City Council has been essential to them. Lastly, Rightsize Newton, as irritating as they are, they unintentionally give us this platform. Because this is a front page issue, we are able to educate Newton citizens about the connection between green buildings, smart growth, and climate change. Next slide. Together, green building advocates and housing advocates can speed the creation of green, affordable housing. And that's the end of my talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. So we're going to hear a little bit more from Emily, and then we're going to do about 15 minutes of Q&A. So again, feel free to drop questions into the chat box.
Hello, this is Emily again. Great. So we are excited to have everybody on the call get involved, potentially including the cat. I love that there's a cat on the call as well. So these are some things that you can do to really make a difference in supporting affordable housing and high-performance affordable housing. The first is to support the Housing Choices Bill. So this is something that the Governor Baker really started on the Housing Choices Bill. It would essentially lower the voting majority necessary for certain smart growth zoning changes. So in Massachusetts, as many of you know, cities and towns need to pass zoning changes with a 2/3 majority, and that's long been a barrier for affordable housing to move forward, particularly in town meeting communities. So if this bill moves forward, it would also lower the voting majority necessary for special permit applications that are in smart growth locations and include at least 10% affordable housing units. So that's something that is very real. It's coming up. We want to make sure that before spring town meetings that folks call their legislators to ask when they will take up housing legislation, specifically supporting the House Bill 4263. Secondly, folks can join the Great Neighborhoods Coalition. This is a Mass Smart Growth Alliance movement in partnership with many partners. There's fun gatherings, including transit-oriented drinks or TO drinks. And it's really just a great way to learn more about what's happening and get involved with smart growth locally. Just for understanding of where your municipality stands in terms of ensuring affordability, that's something that we want to make sure everybody should know. How does your town stand up to others? Is it meaningfully permitting a multifamily housing? Is it creating affordability? Is it preserving the affordable housing units it has? Is it creating more diverse housing stock? So if your community isn't doing that, then the ball's in your court to advocate for more housing, especially affordable housing, we hope. And just quickly, next slide. This is a map that shows how your municipality does on its subsidized housing inventory. It's a snapshot in time from 2017, but you can zoom in, you can see what color your municipality is. If it's paler than bluer, then there's opportunity for folks to really push their communities to advocate for more affordable housing. Going back to the earlier slide, as we mentioned, the CDC community and the other affordable housing partners in your community, what work are they doing? Do you know them? How can you support that work and collaborate with them? We're really into these partnerships and making sure, like Dan said, that these are collaborative, synergistic changes that we want to make among affordable housing and climate activists. So we really appreciate that allyship. Fifth is endorsing the HERO campaign. This is a really exciting potential major new revenue source for housing and climate investments. It's called HERO, which is Housing and Environmental Revenue Opportunities. It's a coalition of housing, climate, faith-based, labor, and social justice movements, and it's working to create a major new revenue stream through doubling the deeds excise tax. This would support investments in affordable housing and climate resiliency and mitigation to the tune of $150 million a year, and it could be really the biggest new investment in housing in decades, laying the foundation for more collaboration among housing, climate, and social justice advocates. Finally, reach out to Rebecca to find out more about the Net Zero Stretch Code campaign by MCAN that can really encourage new construction to be built to a higher performance standard. So we have other ways that you can get involved, but those are kind of our top, and we welcome any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. And a quick action item that I forgot to throw up on here, but it's definitely related to our Net Zero Stretch Code campaign, is to call your senator and ask them to support amendment number 33. And I can send that out in the notes tomorrow. I'll also be sending out all of these slides with this great information from our panelists. But basically, this is a way to continue to advance having a net zero building code in Massachusetts and to have the timeline be really stringent so that we can see municipalities adopting it as soon as 2021. Great. So now we have about 10, 11 minutes to give our panelists some questions. Let's see. So one thing that I'm seeing here that I'm wondering, I know that you addressed it a little bit in the chat, Emily, but if you want to readdress it to our entire audience, what can we be doing to retrofit existing buildings to net zero, and how do we sort of mitigate that cost?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there is good work being done in New York City. I mean, there are real cost implications, and Jesse, please pipe up on this. We are focused right now on making sure that there's adequate incentives for passive house new construction, and we know that we're going to need additional investment to help support the retrofitting or rehabbing of existing buildings to these deeper energy standards. So if you want for some inspiration, folks like Riseborough Community Partners in New York are really pushing the envelope literally in terms of deep energy retrofits on existing buildings. And it does involve additional investment that will look to the energy sector and other funders to help support that transition.
Great, yeah, and if you want to add anything, Jesse, feel free. I was also going to give you the chance to answer the question for folks. Basically, what do we do with high-rise buildings? Is it possible to build buildings that are over, say, 4 or 5 stories and still have them be considered net zero?
Yeah, I think that's a great question that gets to cities in general, which is that in cities we don't grow all our food in the backyard of the buildings, and we don't treat our water in there. You know, we have these sort of community systems that we use in cities. We have community energy already. We have community water treatment. We have community food systems. And so I think energy will be the same thing in our bigger cities. We won't try to make our cities net zero. We will have solar farms around them. We'll have wind farms. We'll have all the renewable energy sources working to feed our cities. Once we get out of the cities, we start pushing to net zero. It's really, you know, basically the roofs aren't big enough once you're over about 3 stories. There's not enough roof. You think of a skyscraper, it's like a little tiny pencil with a tiny little roof. So I think that's okay. That I think we need to, you know, not make the perfect the enemy of the good, that we really need to make great cities and then reduce our energy load as much as possible so we can solve it with community energy. But yeah, net zero is really, it's really a 3-story buildings and less, honestly, just because of the size of their roofs.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to sort of the more holistic nature of MCAN's Buildings campaign, that we're looking for our communities to be net zero as a whole. We're not looking for every single building to achieve net zero standards, since we know that's not feasible. So this is a question I think it would be great for Dan to address. So how do we go about building relationships with affordable housing voices in our communities? Like, how did you start that dialogue with Livable Newton?
Well, I think they found us, but if they hadn't, it would have been a great idea for us to find them. They're looking for allies, too. This is a knockdown, drag-out fight all over Massachusetts, or at least all over eastern Massachusetts. They're opponents to housing development everywhere, and so the housing advocates want allies, and we find that we speak much the same language. So it isn't hard, just ask, and they would be happy to be allies.
Yeah, and I think, Emily, you might also have some insights into how folks can connect with their local CDCs and affordable housing partners if they don't already have those relationships. Yeah,
we'd be happy to share lists of CDCs and other affordable housing partners. MACDC is the umbrella agency for all of the different CDCs, and CHAPA is also a representative umbrella advocacy agency for affordable housing organizations broadly across Massachusetts. So if you go to MACDC and CHAPA's websites, they share all of their different members, and they have great events that, you know, calendars of events that you can start to plug into. So I'll share those links as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we'll be sure to share those with everyone on this call tonight. So here we have a question. I'm not sure who wants to jump in and answer it, but what work is being done to revise and or create energy lease agreements between building residents and owners? Sorry, I just lost that for a moment. Building owners and tenants that address upfront investments and the distribution of cost savings post-construction in properties that are going to be retrofitted.
I can touch on that. Specifically for affordable housing, we're really excited about some of the permanent lenders of affordable housing, such as Mass Housing Partnership or MHP. They're actually incorporating the understanding that you're going to have lower long-term operating costs, and so you're going to have a higher NOI that you can put back into your loan every month, your mortgage payment, and so they provide this kind of integrated financing package that's more preferential for folks who are making these energy and water savings investments in their properties. So that's something that is specifically on the subsidized affordable housing side. I'm not as familiar with the commercial side, and I think it's a really good question that we need to keep on driving at.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Great. So we have another maybe technical question that Jesse, you might want to hop in and answer. So for building on parking lots, where do we leave our cars?
Yeah, I think the key thing is we need to start building buildings in places where people need cars less. And that we've done a funny thing to ourselves where in the 1940s and 50s we built buildings, and then in the 1970s and 80s we all decided kind of collectively that cities were these dirty, crowded places and that we needed to stop building buildings there. And we changed our zoning in the 1970s and 80s. And we overlaid all our towns with these suburban zoning that said that we want to spread everything out a little more than the old ways of doing it. I think we sort of figured out that was a big mistake, but the rules are all sitting there. And you're getting these rezoning fights now about rezoning when in fact it's kind of, can we please put it back to where it said in 1920? That's really what we're all hoping for. Because in 1920, there were trolley car suburbs, and there was streetcars, and there was mass transit in and out of Boston in Newton. And, people just didn't need the cars the same way. So a lot of our worry about cars is that we're worried that when we're at home, we won't be able to get anywhere. And I think that's why it's such a, complicated and fun puzzle is, can we figure out ways to put buildings where we don't need cars, and then our need for all these parking lots will go down.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. To get back sort of to the more local campaign side of things, Dan, do you want to wrap us up by talking about maybe some of the opposition that you've faced by Rightsize Newton, people that are anti-affordable housing, and sort of what kinds of talking points or tools that you've used to continue your advocacy work?
Well, they are well organized and well funded. At city council hearings, they come out in numbers. They have signs. Whenever I meet with a city councilor, I see a bunch of them swarming the hallways. So they're an important adversary. And I think Livable Newton and Greene Newton are fighting them along with the developers. It's important to say. By first developing a really broad coalition. I mentioned just the housing advocates, but there's the Chamber of Commerce, there's the League of Women Voters, and many, many more. So showing that these groups that command a lot of respect are in this together, fighting for these developments, is important. I think making the climate change argument is increasingly important, and more people get it. And then I also think that a lot of people are upset about housing costs, and they recognize that we have a housing crisis. We want to try to make the connection. A lot of people say, well, this housing isn't going to help the housing the housing crisis because these apartments are going to be expensive. Well, it's important that we communicate a good message that lots of dense housing will moderate housing prices in all price ranges.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and I think that also speaks to our sort of mission, which is to connect folks with their partners in order to win campaigns on the local level. And as Emily mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, we are more than happy to work with you guys in your towns and cities to help you find these partners to start building these campaigns if this is something that you're interested in doing. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are just about at time, and thank you to our incredible panelists. As I mentioned, I will be sending out a copy of the webinar recording as well as the slides and other resources that our panelists have mentioned tomorrow. So stay tuned for that, and please be in touch with any questions. We're excited to meet you guys up again for our fourth and final addition to this webinar series. So thank you again to everyone for being here tonight, and thank you to our panelists.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you all. Take care.
Take care.